yet. So a couple of announcements here. We have the roundtable forum sheets. They look just a half page like this. We have those up here in the front if you would like one. What this is, it allows you to submit questions to be addressed to any of the presenters except me. If you have a question for me, you could put it on there too, but I'm not on the panel. But any of the presenters this weekend, you can ask questions, and then these may be selected to be discussed on Sabbath afternoon. So if that is something that interests you, please participate. Also, we have CDs available of the programs this weekend. And you'll want to see Mike Temple, and he is directly behind you all at the sound table in the back. He has forms that you can complete to make sure you get the programs that you want, or the whole set, if that's of interest. A note here on the camp meeting nurse. We had a announcement on this last night. Her office is back at the Circle on the west side of the building near the locating office, just down the way from there. Real easy to find if you need anything. I think we have posted her phone number, and it should be on the screens that are up there as well. So if you need to call, she has a phone dedicated to her camp nurse duties. So just to be aware of that. Of course, keep your eye on the monitors out there for any other announcements that might come up. We're not really expecting any bad weather, but we do plan for that contingency, and there would be some information there under those circumstances as well. Before we get started, let's just bow our heads for a word of prayer, and then I will introduce our speaker. Lord, we know that you have a plan for each one of us, and we know that part of that plan is to be here today and to learn what our speaker has to teach us. Bless him, bless our hearts, bless our minds to be open and receptive. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Our speaker today was born and raised in Los Angeles, and was captured by Hollywood's positive images of science. Having been introduced to rock hounding as a youth, he enrolled as a geology major at the University of California, Riverside. After experiencing some disappointments and challenges to his worldview, he became a Christian and enrolled at Loma Linda University as a theology major, completing a bachelor's degree there. He went on to earn a Master of Divinity from Andrews Theological Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry degree from Fuller Theological Seminary. However, he never lost his love for earth sciences and issues related to origins. He is currently co-host of a nationally syndicated Life Talk Radio's Sink the Beagle, a lighthearted look at the subject of creationism and evolutionism, a resource person for the Adventist Church on origin issues, sometimes involving television. Dr. Hudson lectures widely to groups, both secular and religious. He is married to Cynthia. She is a registered dietitian, and they have 2 children. He currently serves the North Pacific Union Conference as the director of their Creation Study Center. At this time, I give to you Dr. Stan Hudson.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Oh, wow. Usually they're so glad that I've finished, they clap at the end, but anyway. Okay, you guys have a good lunch? Okay, I hope not too good. So we'll see what we can do to try to keep you awake, because we're talking about the coolest subject ever, dinosaurs. And we will take a look at some of the Adventist flavoring on the subject, okay? So let's take a look as we take a look at dragons and dinosaurs. All right, well, you may already know that the word dragon shows up in your Bibles in Revelation. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who, what? Deceives the whole world. Remember that, that's important. But more importantly right now, when I bring up the word dragon, and it flashes in your brain, what's the image that goes with it? Something red and pointy? Something like this, maybe? Oh yeah, that's what a lot of people think of when they think of dragon. But guess what? When you go back to the day that John wrote the book of Revelation, the word dragon or drakon simply means large reptile. Now, the medieval image of fire-breathing, pointy, and all this, you're kind of adding on to that. So I want you to remember that, because the word dragon in the original context is going to be important as we get to the end of this talk. And that's when you do more clapping, is at the end of the talk. Okay, so when did we first find dinosaurs? We're going to give you a little bit of history, because we've not always known about these things. What did we think about? Well, first of all, when I'm talking with kids, I show this picture and I said, don't you want to be a scientist? That's a dude. Look at that hairstyle. Anyway, Robert Plot in Oxford University, 1676, was the first scientist to write a paper about a dinosaur bone. Only problem was they didn't know about dinosaurs. And so he looked at the bone that they found in England. It looked something like this one up here. And wrote a paper on it and described it as to what he thought it was. Anybody know what he guessed it to be? He thought it might be from a Roman-era elephant. A Roman-era elephant. And unfortunately, it was not. He was wrong. Scientists sometimes are wrong. Let me go to America now. And this is a pastor from Connecticut. In his little town that he pastored in, he noticed that by the side of the road there were footprints in the ground, footprints that looked like that, and he thought that way back when there must have been like ostrich kind of birds walking around in Connecticut. And he wrote a paper about that. Well, what he was writing about were dinosaur footprints, very similar to the one that's in this slab cut out from basically that same formation back east. So he thought it was from birds. Well, guess what? Sometimes pastors are wrong, because actually they were dinosaur footprints. Well, they found things in England, meanwhile, in early 1800s also. There was a physician named Mantell who found this tooth and some other bones. He asked some of his science-oriented friends, can anybody here tell me what this tooth looks like? Finally, one of his friends say, well, I'll tell you what it looks like, but it can't be from that. Well, what do you think it is? It looks like an iguana's tooth, a tooth from an iguana, but it's 20 times too big. So from that and other discoveries, they came up with the dinosaur called the iguanodon, or iguana tooth. That's the artist's rendering of an iguanodon. So that would be among the earliest drawings that artists thought maybe these early creatures looked like. I think it's kind of cool. They have since found more recently more bones, and now it looks a little bit more like that in their thinking. So they also found in England some of these remains, and that became what they called a megalosaurus, or big lizard, literally. Saurus means lizard. So, big lizard. Now, who came up with the word dinosaur? And I'd like to point out to some that a Christian came up with the word dinosaur. This is Richard Owen, who was probably, if you'd never heard of Charles Darwin, was the most famous British scientist of the 19th century. He set up the British Museum. Richard Owen was an anatomist, and he came up with the word Dinosaurus, which means awesome lizard. Okay, some of you may have heard the old description of terrible lizard, but terrible in those days meant awesome. So anyway, awesome lizard. In England in the mid-1800s, they had a display going on at the Crystal Ice Palace. This is in London. And they had outside statues made of what they imagined these early discoveries were telling them about previous creatures. And to this day, these statues still exist in London at another park. But they're kind of interesting. They look kind of like crocodiles on steroids or something. But anyway, kind of interesting. But of all the discoveries made in terms of public awareness, I kind of put this toward the top, at least in America. This is Dr. Joseph Leidy. He had a science institute, like a museum, in Philadelphia. He heard about some bones in New Jersey, over the border in New Jersey. He and another person dug them up and assembled them in his museum. And he named the animal a hadrosaur, or a duck-billed dinosaur. Hadrosaur. This is it was actually done in the 50s and 60s, finally in 1868 complete. Didn't have a skull, so they made one out of paper mache, put it on top, and called it a hadrosaur. 1868. This is the world's first skeleton on public display. Nobody had ever seen anything like this. Every museum worth its salt today has got these, right? I mean, you can't hardly go into a natural history museum and not see dinosaur skeletons. But this was the first one. And this was amazing. Now, evolutionists challenge creationists as they're starting to find these kind of bones. They say, all right, you Bible believers, where are these guys in the Bible? And we had a couple of responses, anywhere from, to, I think the devil made those bones and put them in the ground to confuse us, or something like that. We didn't have really good answers at first. We got much better now. But anyway, this was sensational. And this being Philadelphia, being in the United States, they figured out they could sell tickets. Okay, so the line went down the street and around the corner. Other museums saw that and said, hey, we want some of these skeletons too. And so they hired dinosaur hunters to go out to the west and find them. So that is the first American dinosaur discovered, the hadrosaur. So these are the guys that went out and tried to find bones. They came out to such obscure places as North Dakota, and Montana, Wyoming, Alberta, Canada, anywhere around the Rockies, all the way down to northern Arizona. And we're digging up bones in ways today which would be way illegal. But anyway, they dug them up and sold them to museums in the East Coast, New York, Washington, D.C. And suddenly, museums figured out this is a way to go. And the knowledge of dinosaurs increased greatly, especially in the public eye. This is an iguanodon. They were finding more in Europe. Now they're finding them in Belgium by the end of the century. American dinosaurs also went on tour. This is a museum in Paris around 1900, and a big Brachiosaurus is making its way across Europe. So, dinosaurs, pretty cool. Now, this is the New York American Museum of Natural History, and they also wanted to have, it's like the premier museum at the time. They wanted a nice dinosaur too, and so they finally acquired something they called a brontosaurus. You ever heard of a brontosaurus? Okay, brontosaurus, which means thunder lizard. So you can imagine it walking down the hallway and causing a thunderous sound. People came from all around the world in New York to see this great specimen, and you had experts looking at it and saying, wow, what a fabulous specimen this is. Are you sure about the head? Turned out they had the wrong head on the dinosaur. It had come from another kind of dinosaur, and they married the two together and called it a brontosaurus. To this day, if you want to get a discussion going with a dinosaur nerd, and they are out there, ask them this question. So do you think there is such a thing as a brontosaurus? They will have an opinion on that. Anyway, so it was an apatosaurus body with a camarasaurus head. Anyway, now this was the artist's rendition of the camarasaurus put on the wall there at the museum, and people saw this. And they looked at it and said, what kind of world was this? Because this was new stuff to a world that was very frankly trained into thinking the biblical view and, animals kind of like what we have now and all that. So they tried to, they tried to imagine what this was all about. Now, for about 50 years of discovery, the image of a dinosaur was a big vegetarian. The teeth were vegetarian, it looked like kind of big elephant kinds of things. So the scariest thing about a dinosaur was don't get stepped on, right? That was the image. Then they found something with teeth. Now, I've been on the back roads of Wyoming where this guy was driving me down this road, and he said, "Stan, do you see that hill up ahead?" Yes. That is where Osborn found it in 1905, the very first Tyrannosaurus rex. T-Rex, king tyrant lizard, and that changed everything. Here he is on display in 1905, and let me tell you, museums wanted to get one of those because that would pack people in, as it did. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about T-Rexes because people are curious about T-Rex. We do know one thing that T-Rexes ate, and that's Triceratops, and how would we know that? Take a guess. Pardon me? Yeah, how would we know that T-Rexes ate Triceratops? That's right. They found a skeleton with stomach still inside, had lunch there still. So they found bits and pieces of a Triceratops inside a T-Rex. Now, here's the thing. It does not answer what T-Rex nerds really wrestle with, and that's the big question. Was a T-Rex a predator or a scavenger? Did it catch things or did it simply clean up? Now, why would you wonder as to whether or not this was a predator? Why would you maybe have questions about that? It's got tiny little arms, right? So how could it grab something? Although some have tried to say, well, maybe it ran and landed on things with its bare, back feet. But also, this doesn't necessarily look like it's a fast-running animal. There's a lot of weight there. So maybe it wasn't, that fast. I tell people that we found in the same strata as T-Rexes, we find hadrosaurs. Hadrosaurs, like that I talked about. This is a version of a hadrosaur called an Ammonosaurus. And we know that these could run 25 miles an hour. Well, how do we know that? Because T-Rex could run 24 miles an hour. Okay, anyway, it was an attempt. One thing we know that he ate was Triceratops. Now, here is a really interesting fossil. And take a look at this right here. This is a fossilized remains of a T-Rex and a Triceratops all in one place. The Triceratops has teeth marks on its bones. The T-Rex has broken ribs. And yet they're fossilized together. And you might ask, well, how in the world did that happen? And here's a possibility. Let's think of this scenario as maybe being what happened. You have the waters of the flood were rising. The animals were looking for high places to get away from the water. And you found a high place, unfortunately. The king of the mountain here, we have two animals trying to be in the same place. And got a little too close, a little too uncomfortable, and they fought. And the waters covered them up and buried them together. Now, to me, that's one of the better scenarios I can imagine, to finding them together. We have just 2 or 3 known footprints of T-Rexes that are unquestionably T-Rex. Here's one in New Mexico at an undisclosed location to protect it. 33 inches long, 28 inches wide, and we're talking, 9 inches deep. So these animals were very, very heavy. Now, if you ever go to Hill City, which is in what state? Good for you. Black Hills right there. Go to Hill City, and there is a there's a fossil museum right downtown there. Are you familiar with it? Anybody been there? Okay. Go there. You're going to find, so those are the Larson brothers who run that. And I've had the privilege of going down below in their basement with Art Chadwick, a Southwestern scientist, and we got to see, these are world-class dinosaur hunters. And they had an affectionately named T-Rex, Stan. Yeah, and Stan was found there on display. Whoops. Now, what was interesting about Stan is that Stan, and they're named incidentally by their discoverers. We don't know the genders of any dinosaur, and that's very much in debate. But Stan found it, so it was named Stan. Montana State University, you can go find in their museum Mike. Okay, you get the idea. Anyway, Stan was 40% complete, and that was the most complete T-Rex they had ever found up to that point. And then the Larson brothers were involved with another discovery found in South Dakota in 1990, and that was a dinosaur named Sue. And Sue was 90% complete. From 40 to 90, okay? A slight improvement. Anyway, so she's a beautiful thing, and if you ever go to Chicago, the Field Museum, they will put on display for you Sue. And Chicago is in America. They sell tickets because they had to raise $8 million just to buy Sue. So, and then they spent all this money in building around her and putting her on display. Incidentally, when you see a dinosaur skeleton like that, is that the real skeleton? No. Almost never is, especially the big ones. Why? Because the original bones are heavy and breakable, and they could fall and break, or they can fall on somebody and break them. So all of those reasons, plus they like to study them in the lab and all that. And they're never complete. You never have 100% anyway, so for sure some of them are going to be imagined bones that are, like along the vertebra, they got to do all that. So, however, up above there, you can see that landing up there around, and that is where Sue's head was placed. And a skull of any dinosaur is where the money is. That is where that they're so rare to find skulls. Why? Because skull bones are the thinnest of the bones, and they break easily, and they're, I told you I went to Tucson and took that difficult trip every year down to Tucson to see what's available, what they found the last year. And there was a big-time fossil company selling, in their case, bits and pieces of a T-Rex skull. And I asked them about it and said, yeah, we found the skeleton, but the skull was just disintegrated. So we thought people might like to find. I'll take a few of those. So I took some T-Rex skull pieces. Anyway, now T-Rexes, believe it or not, have been very important in the subject of creation issues, and that is especially age of the earth. Now, whenever you talk with an evolutionist, probably our biggest challenge is age of the earth and age of life on the earth. That's probably our biggest one, because the science they have for determining the age of the earth looks good on paper. Looks good, a solid science on paper. When you actually apply it in the field, it doesn't always work. But anyway, that's another lecture. So, in 2005, scientists who were trying to study the interior of T-Rex bones had them in a solution that was dissolving it to get down to the inner parts. They left it in the solution too long and got right down to the center. That wasn't their purpose. Left it in too long. And some people who were studying it said, you could almost hear the voice cry out across America, "We have soft tissue here." What? No, we've got veins that are bendable. We have what looks like red blood cell stains. That's not possible if they're 65 million years old. Quite literally, not possible. You can bury these and seal them in lead, and they will not preserve that well. And this is based on studies that evolutionists have done for years. They wanted to know how long it takes for things to break down in bones, and so they've had all the numbers. and we just showed them the numbers, saying, how can this still be with your model of millions of years? It's been sensational. This discovery has changed a lot of things. This was a woman who was in charge of this scientific group, Mary Schweitzer, and she caught it. I mean, we were wondering where feminist supporters were at the time she got clobbered on this. You call yourself a scientist. The university you work for should fire you. You are a disgrace to the whole profession. What shoddy work are you doing? And also kind of on the side, and you know what creationists are going to do with this? And how dare you publish this? I mean, she really caught it. A couple of the criticisms she heard did resonate with her that she might have done something better. So she went back and redid her study and came back with the same conclusion. Now, science has accepted this reluctantly. Most of scientists have. And now you're getting people looking for all kinds of soft material in fossils they never thought about looking for before, because we all knew they were millions of years old, right? There wouldn't be anything left but rock. So they're now finding proteins and all kinds of other soft things, including occasionally maybe even DNA. And they're finding things like that where they never thought they would before. This is sensational stuff and is opening up a whole new world. Okay, I bet you got questions on that, but here we keep going. Let's talk about footprints. Footprints are fossil evidence. And there's, well, let's just keep going. I want to go to these other things real quick. I've got something up here you've got to look at. Some people wonder, were dinosaurs really reptiles? Because there's some things about them a little unusual. And they have actually found skin impressions of dinosaurs. Now, how did that happen? Because when a dinosaur got covered in mud at the flood, frankly, it's the only way we got fossils is because of the flood. When mud covered the skin and hardened into rock eventually over time, of course, the inside of the dinosaur deteriorated and just left the bones. A lot of times people are looking for the bones, just rip them out of the ground and get the skeleton out. That's all they're trying for. But now they're a little more careful because sometimes you can actually get the part of the mud that became stone, actually pop that off and you can actually see the shape of the skin. The skin impression is still there. And so this picture right here is, whoops, come back here. That's me. Whoops, oh no, how do I get back to that? I can do it by that. Okay, so that is a picture of this up here. I have some skin impression of a hadrosaur. Take a look at it carefully and you see scales, just like you see on any lizard or snake. See reptilian skin on them. So yes, afraid so. What about eggs? Dinosaur eggs. When I was a little kid and I imagined giant dinosaurs and I thought their eggs must surely be the size of something like that. Size of a Volkswagen, right? Guess how big they are? They are this big. Oh. This is a dinosaur egg from China, where a lot of them come from. And that's about as big as a dinosaur egg gets. Now, I know what you're wondering. Are there bones inside here? No, they're probably not. Maybe 1 in 10,000 has any kind of an embryo left. But this is full of sand and rock and been preserved. But this is as big as they get, which means even the biggest dinosaurs, and we're not 100% sure what kind of dinosaur that was, probably a hadrosaur, but even the biggest dinosaur started off that big. So, now isn't that cute? Don't you want one of these? Come on. So, interesting. Now, those kind of questions are interesting on an issue that we'll get to a little later, and that is, did any get on the ark? Okay, we'll keep going. Now, you good Adventists that live here up in this part of the neck of the woods, and you have free time next summer, you can dig up dinosaur bones too. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? How cool is that? And we take a group of pastors and teachers and their students up to the Southwestern Adventist University run Dino Dig in northeastern Wyoming. It's just across from the Black Hills in South Dakota. There they run this camp every year. For the month of June, you can go 1 day or 30 days. They're looking for volunteers. You just pay a camping fee, cover food. And anyway, there it is there on the absolute forsaken corner out there in northeastern Wyoming, because right here is a Christian-owned camp, not Adventist, but the family's owned it for, this ranch has owned it for 100 years, and it is a world-class dinosaur deposit location. Secret as to where it is exactly. But anyway, the owners have wanted the bones to be studied by Christian scientists, not evolutionists, but creationists. And providentially, God has connected Southwestern and Art Chadwick and his team with them, and every year they come out here. And this is what you do. You go dig up hadrosaur bones, mostly, some T-Rex bones. And this is a very interesting deposit. Now, there's my associate's girl, Lila, and there I am holding a rib bone, and you practically can't dig in a 1 foot square without finding something. It's very, very full. Now, what happens there is, there I am uncovering another rib, adult rib. Hadrosaurs are giraffe-sized dinosaurs, okay, two-legged dinosaurs, fairly good size, although we found some juveniles. Anyway, before we take the bones out and wrap them, there will be a GPS locator. One of the team will bring over a global positioning, using a satellite system, put it on the corner of the bone as it's being uncovered, and then that corner and that corner and that corner, record its position, eventually take a picture of the bone, and to scale, drop it into a program that looks like this. Now, this is cutting-edge technology, cutting edge. And this is showing where the bones are found as though you removed the dirt and are looking down on this bone bed. Isn't this something? This is 3D too. You can turn it on its side. It's very interesting. You find the heavier bones at the bottom and the lighter at top. Now, when you're looking at this bone bed, and most of these are hadrosaur bones, but there'll be a few odds and ends, maybe an occasionally alligator, maybe a triceratops bone, T-Rex bone, that sort of thing. Take a look. What do you see? What do you not see in this picture? What do you not see? You don't see completion. You don't see connections. These are disarticulated bones. They're spread out. You also don't see skulls, because skulls, that gives you a little clue as to what happened here. You don't see skulls. So what you do see on the bones are rounded edges, and this is found in about a 2 foot thick mudstone kind of deposit. Very fine grain, easy to dig out mostly, some parts. Anyway, what is this? What happened here? It's going to be a little gross as I describe this, but we're looking at the death experience of literally 10 to 20,000 hadrosaurs in this area. Did you hear me? 10 to 20,000 giraffe-sized dinosaurs are estimated to have been in this general area, based on the number of bones found per section. Now, what happened? What happened to these dinosaurs? What apparently happened is they were killed and they died in some kind of event, but their bones were not exposed very long to the air. They were a little bit, but then something moved them and rolled the bodies for probably miles. So much so that the bodies began to fall apart, skulls were broken, and eventually all of this kind of slid into a depression and got filled up with mud and covered up and fossilized. What does that sound like to you? Sure sounds like one of the actions of the flood, doesn't it? Pretty good evidence of this, from this dig site for the flood. And so, like I said, if you guys want to be involved in a fun experience, Zoran, next summer, try to sign on. Southwestern Adventist University, swau.edu. Go to their website and you'll find information. Yeah, yes.
Do you think the dinosaurs could have floated together, or were they just pushed by water into one place, the 20,000 dinosaurs?
20,000 dinosaurs, and this is over a fairly wide area, but the density of bones is similar wherever they've studied.
The question is, did they go as did they swum as a herd, or were they killed and limbs off?
The theory is, and I've talked to the people who are most knowledgeable about what happened there, they say that the bodies, apparently, it looks like the bodies might have had some time to fall apart before they were transported, but then they were transported some distance, and they imagine miles.
So they had some type of buoyancy also, right? Besides the water incursion.
We don't necessarily think that all the actions of the flood always were covered all the land all the time. We think there were some places where there was dry land for a time, and then eventually the waters got covered up there. So they weren't by necessity having to float. There may have been some place where they just were laying out for a while and fell apart after it. That's the theory, but there's some of this that's still to be discussed. Anyway, okay, so how do we know what dinosaurs look like? Here's a skull of an ankylosaur, and you can kind of imagine that some of them are very interesting looking things. I'm going to talk for a moment about the most, when you talk with evolutionists on this subject, they really believe that there is a slam dunk for dinosaur to bird evolution. I mean, it's very much like this. Oh, don't tell me you creationists don't even believe in dinosaurs becoming birds, please. You know, that sort of thing. There's two theories. One is a large ground bipeds, and again, that'd be like T-Rex. Something like a T-Rex eventually became a bird. What's the problem with that image? How does that look? Does that look like that easily could become a bird? So almost everything is wrong here for this to become a bird. The little arms have got to suddenly become the biggest limbs. The big ones on the back and the big heavy tail, you got to lose all that. And, you know, meanwhile, get hollow bones and lighter. But anyway, that's one. And so there's a lot of problems with that, and a lot of them will say, okay, that theory is probably not the best one. So they go with small crocodiles from the trees. And that is skin folds. They imagine that maybe what happened is they had a crocodile-like thing crawl up a tree, see food, jump out, grab it, successfully made babies. Incidentally, making babies is the game. So the things that make babies live, develop, evolve. So jumped out, got food. Well, somehow or other, some baby crocodile thing developed skin folds, flaps, and they could go sailing further, catch more food, be more successful, more likely to make babies, okay? Somewhere along the line, that became a wing. Somewhere along the line, the bumps on the skin, like bumpy scales, like that, somehow became a follicle that grew out from underneath the skin. And that helped. So, yeah, are there any questions? You can see science is doing good here. This is good. What?
If the young bearers,
Yes.
who were one mutant
Yes.
that would meet this,
Yes.
by the time another mutant was born that would carry on that gene,
No, see, you don't understand. Next question. She said simply, if you get one with a mutation, don't you have to have another? And they somehow are able to produce children, which is another. And what if one's in Argentina and the other is in North Dakota? How are we going to? Yeah, anyway, so, yeah.
how many million generations
This happened, it happened millions of times in hundreds of thousands of species. We're here, aren't we? It must have happened.
okay, so I'll billion years for that to happen, and for in humans to go from an embryo stage to a full human is only 9 months. When did the time cut down? From a billion years down to 9 months.
I don't know.
Just wondered.
She's talking about, you know, there's a famous view on some of this is ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Have you ever heard of that? Basically, from an egg to becoming a full-grown whatever is evolution being relived. The millions of years suddenly being shown in just 9 months or whatever the months are. So how about that? Huh? That's interesting. So anyway, let's keep going here. Moving on. So here's the thing about bird evolution, and I love this one. First of all, feathered birds go down in the mid-Jurassic, which is Archaeopteryx. Have you ever heard of Archaeopteryx? Do I have a picture of Archaeopteryx? I don't have a picture of Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is a famous bird. Incidentally, Darwin had some things going for him, because in the mid-1800s, a couple things were being found in science that seemed to say this guy in England has got something. First of all, in Germany, Solnhofen, they found an Archaeopteryx fossil, and boy, did it look like half lizard, half bird. So maybe this Darwin guy is onto something. Also, in Germany, in a valley called Neander, what's the word for valley in German? The word for valley in German is Tal, T-H-A-L. So in the Neanderthal cave, they found some bones of a human. And when they assembled them, you know, and some others they found a little later, they found a guy that was over like this. Now they studied those bones later and found out he had rickets. But anyway, it set the stage for everybody assuming we must have started in caves. So that was going on when Darwin was talking. So Darwin had all this stuff going on that seemed to help him get it going. Okay, but back to birds. Feathered birds go down to that Archaeopteryx. Now, think of two kinds of dinosaurs. One was a flying dinosaur, and guess what? The flying dinosaurs died out. They didn't become birds. Nope, not flying. Land dinosaurs, two-legged dinosaurs. Incidentally, when they look at the hips of dinosaurs, there's two kinds of dinosaurs. One has bird hips, and the other has lizard hips. Anyway, guess what? One became a bird. Bird hips or lizard hips? Lizard hips. They think evolved into a bird. Anyway, I just think that's interesting. Not the one that had the correct hips. So anyway, real quickly, so not flying, land dinosaurs, but here's a problem. Look at this, watch. Birds go down further in the fossil record, and that's a problem. How do we know? Because look, this is Triassic layer rock found in Argentina, and boy, does it have bird footprints on it. It has bird footprints, birds about the size of a gull, seagull, and they hopped around, and we know it's a bird because it has a backward toe, the helix. So anyway, take a look at this. They have no clue what this is. No clue. Because it's not in the right place. They really want this not to be Triassic layer rock, but it is. That's settled. So what is a bird doing down that far down? This is the Argentinian scientist who comments about this. Its significance because we find footprints with morphology, that shape, identical to modern birds and rocks that predate by 55 million years the record of true Aves birds. So what is he saying? This rock is too far down for us to know what to do with it. Incidentally, it's significant. When he says it's significant, that's science talk for we don't know what this means. Okay, we think it's important, but we don't know what to do with it. Now, I'd like to suggest to you what happened here. The flood was coming up. This bird was in the air. It was coming up. He was looking around. Oh, there's a place that I can land. It's, running out of gas. Here's a place, and lands here and hops on this mud. And then eventually the waters are coming up. I got to get out of here. And off it flew to later be caught in levels where other birds were caught. Does that not make sense? Okay, what was that international symbol of affirmation? Okay, so anyway, that I can explain it. I kind of feel like I ought to be the kid in the room that said, you know. Anyway, dinosaur evolution by types. When you think of dinosaurs, don't you think, well, now there's evolution. There's evolution. Well, I've got 10 families of dinosaurs on the right here. This is going back in time, or lower in the ground that way, over to an imagined Triassic layer ancestor that they haven't found yet, okay? But let's dig below these dinosaur groups, and we even put birds up there and show us how open-minded we are to, and all of these numbers here are the numbers of fossils we have of those families, and these are all very conservative numbers. Okay, so let's take a look. Well, we don't find any, there's nothing there. Yeah, we don't find any ancestors to dinosaurs of any variety. And if you think I'm kidding, here's an evolutionist talking about that very thing. He says, from my reading of the fossil record of dinosaurs, no direct ancestors found for any dinosaur species. Alas, my list of dinosaurian ancestors is an empty one. Okay, so all the dinosaurs do what all the other animals in the fossil record do. They just suddenly show up, fully formed, and there they are. There's nothing underneath them that's kind of sort of like what's up above. All right, how big do dinosaurs get? Some, Argentinosaurus, you can kind of guess where it was found. They found evidence of 130 feet long and 14 elephants heavy. It'd be an interesting scale, wouldn't you think, to see 14? Okay, anyway. How small did they get? As small as chickens. As small as chickens, which is going to lead us to the next question of, what's the difference between a dinosaur and just a regular old reptile? What's the difference? Different species, but the hint is it's structural. It's structural. And it's not size, because I just showed you they got the size of chickens. What? The vertebra, no, not the vertebra. Huh? Zoran, come on up here, man. You ought to take over for me. No, come on. Zoran knows. Zoran knows. It's in the hip structure. It's in the hips. Because in a regular, there you go, the hips throw the legs out straight from a lizard. But for a dinosaur, it throws the legs straight down and gets the body off the ground. And you might think of Komodo dragon or alligators or whatever. The legs go straight out. The lizard kind of does this to get around. So anyway, that's the difference, not size. Now, does the Bible tell us anything about dinosaurs? A couple things that are interesting. Remember, the word was created in the mid-1800s, so obviously it's a modern word comparatively. So God created great sea creatures in Genesis 1:21, and the word tananim in Hebrew usually translates to reptiles. Probably means long things in Hebrew, but anyway, they kind of think, well, maybe sea reptiles. But what I want you to look at, and forget Leviathan for a minute, because Leviathan people think, what was that? There's a whole chapter. Here's a section of the Bible you need to read sometime when you're really into some reading. The last few chapters of Job has the longest section in the Bible of God speaking nonstop. And what's God talking about? His creation. And can I put it in human terms? He's bragging about the cool things he's made. Have you seen this? Have you looked at this? Check this out, you know? And I'm into that, because you learn so much about God by studying his creation, his artwork. You're walking into his gallery, and you can tell what the artist is into. Leviathan, take a look at it. If you have the kind of Bible in tiny, tiny print at the bottom of the page, scholars think Leviathan was what do they say? Not dinosaur. I don't hear it. Not whale, no. No. Oh, no. You're close. A leviathan. I'm talking leviathan. No, it's a Nile crocodile. And a Nile crocodile does make sense for a couple of things. It says its skin is impenetrable, and also when it causes the water to boil. If you see what a crocodile does when it has prey in its mouth, it rolls, and the water looks like it's boiling. And I kind of think Leviathan maybe, but Behemoth is a whole nother thing here. And let's take a look at this from Job 40. Look now at the behemoth. The word behemoth means beast. No help there. Okay? Look at, but I kind of think it's the beast, all right? Which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox, vegetarian. Okay. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power's in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs are like bars of iron. Powerful animal. He is the first of the ways of God. Now that phrase caught my attention. What does that mean? First of the ways of God. I've looked at the scholarly comments about that, and there's an agreement. It's not talking about chronology. It's not talking about the first thing made, not first animal made. Instead, it's talking about the preeminent animal, the alpha of all alphas, the king of the beast, the one who stands at the top of the pyramid. Okay, now I'm getting really excited now as I look at my Bible and look for that tiny print at the bottom for behemoth. What do scholars think behemoth was? Somebody said the word a little while ago. Hippo. A hippopotamus. Hippopotamus? Since when? Since when does hippopotamus, inspire you with, grander thoughts of the Creator? A hippopotamus, he moves his tail like a cedar. The Hebrew for moves there is sways. Sways his tail. And a cedar is the largest tree in the Middle East. Have you ever seen a hippopotamus tail? Second choice is elephant. Okay? All right, so what are we talking about here that would impress you as the most amazing animal God has made? Well, how about something like, there's a south end of a hippopotamus. There is Job for size. Might God be showing him something like this? Because I think that is a possibility. Now, I know Adventists, we're coming to it. But anyway, certainly would be an impressive animal. Now, real quickly, as creationists, do we believe in any sort of evolution? What does the word evolution mean? Change. Do we believe any animals changed? Right? The snake changed, right? The serpent changed. It didn't used to look like it was something flying. It was in a tree. You are cursed more than all cattle, God says to the snake, and then describes what now that's going to look like. You are now going to be on the ground. You are no longer going to be an attractive animal that you would draw Eve over to look. I'm going to let you. You're going to lose all that. You are now going to become less than what you used to be, because that's what cursed means. If I had time, I'd have some fun with you about needing to put on a Hebrew head. Unscrew your Greek head, which is what you've got, and screw on a Hebrew head, because cursing and blessing in Greek thinking is nothing. Have a nice day, that's a blessing. But in Hebrew thinking, blessing is an important thing. You make something better than what it was before. Same way, cursing is making something less than what it was before. It's a couple of steps down. Now, you are cursed more than all cattle, which is meaning that when God talks about the end of the earth and all flesh has come before me, incidentally, I talked last night, the problem of the animal kingdom was violence, right? And sin had affected the animal kingdom as well. And what did it look like? The curse. Now, take a look at this guy. This is an ankylosaur. These guys are about the size of one of these tables, most of them. And take a look at him. Doesn't he look like a tank on four legs? Does this thing look like it waddled out of the Garden of Eden? And you were just petting it, It's got spikes all around. It's got an armored head. It's got a tail that has a club on it This animal looks like it's ready for combat, doesn't it? Looks like that to me. There's a lot of animals that you could say similarly seem to be living in a combat-oriented world. Now, this is important. This makes more sense in an Adventist context than just about anywhere, as you'll see in a minute. Real quickly, what happened to the dinosaurs? There's another view possibility of what happened to the dinosaurs. They just were on the wrong boat, I think. Some animals didn't want the dinosaurs to make it. So, yeah, anyway, that's what happened. Or it could have been meteors, and I'm a big believer in the meteorite strikes of the Earth. They're finding more and more evidence that meteors have hit the Earth in the past. I frankly think, how can I put this? I have a whole theology on this based on throwing rocks. Anywhere from the execution method for Israel to God executing judgments on the evil of this world in the same method, and that is throwing rocks. And so I think meteorites may be involved with the breaking up of the crust of the earth, the pressurizing things, water underneath, all that. Anyway, so possible answer. Because of the KT boundary, I won't pass. Yeah, there's uridium found in meteorites. Okay, and incidentally, there's the backside of the moon. Have you ever seen that? Backside of the moon is dead on target-wise with the Earth, and it's absolutely plastered with meteor strikes. So a lot of meteors were coming right on past in the history of the Earth. Wind up with this kind of question. Did any dinosaurs sneak onto the ark? Okay. I can hear your wheels turning. Let me try a couple things with you. First of all, did you know that from all around the world, just like we had the flood stories last night, from every corner, we've got giant lizard stories from all around the world. Call them dragon stories. And whether you're in China or whether in England, St. George slaying the dragon, you've got these ancient memories when there used to be bigger lizards around. Now, when you talk to an evolutionist about it and you show him a big bone, you know, he'll point out this bone and say, well, we think that the ancient people saw these bones and imagined they were part of these giant dragons, these lizards. And I said, well, where would you get a lizard from a bone like this? Where would you get a lizard? And what's a lizard to most people living in the ancient world? A lizard was an annoying thing. I mean, you know, honey, there's a lizard in the kitchen. Will you please come get it? That's about the most impacted the lizard had in the lives of people. Wouldn't you rather have imagined, if you saw a bone this big, wouldn't you rather imagine something scary like a giant lion or a tiger or a bear? And there are no ancient stories of giant lions, tigers, or bears. They're always consistently lizard stories. Why is that? Is it maybe because there were somehow large ones that even lived past the flood? Like Alexander the Great having a story about one that was over 100 feet long. And these are casually mentioned in these historical records, like no big thing. Incidentally, the good news is that all kingdoms of the animal world will be restored, including the cobra's hole and the viper's den. It looks like the reptile world, whatever it was before the flood, gets restored. God is a big restorer of originals. Have you ever noticed that? Yes. Yeah.
I was talking to somebody and they were wondering if people who have pets and they are saved, their pets will go to heaven with them.
I want to preach on this. Does God save our pets? You know, you ask a Baptist that, and you know what a Baptist will say? Of course not, because a dog doesn't have a soul. And God saves souls. Okay, what does God do with this planet? Does he destroy it and then go make another one somewhere else? Or does he restore the original? What does he do? He restores the original. Does he come? Let's come down to humans now. Does he get rid of us and make clones of us that are way more cooperative than you and I are? Might be tempting. But no, he makes the original into, restores it. He likes restoring. So let's go all the way to animals then. Do you see God favoring animals in the Bible? They were in the ark. I think God loves animals. One of the things I talk about in the overall subject of theistic evolution, if you believe in millions of years and God, which millions of Americans do, then what you've made God is the originator of death, because it was God's method of creating new species. Millions of years of fighting, clawing, and eventually developing into something else, only to die out for the next one to come along. That was God's method. You make God the originator of death. Do you like that image of God? It's nowhere in the Bible. Anyway, here's a text to take. There's something Jesus said to his disciples about sparrows. He says this, that, let's see now. You say 2 sparrows are worth a penny, but I tell you, not one of them shall fall to the ground without your Father. And literally, I just told you the exact words in Greek. Many of your translations say none of them fall to the ground without your Father's will. But the word will is supplied. It's not in the original. It's literally saying no sparrow falls alone. Did you hear that? No sparrow falls alone. The Father is present. And contrasting what Jesus said to the disciples, you guys think 2 can be bought with a penny. That's not what the Father thinks. Father has a much higher view of sparrows than that. He's present. He feels their loss when they hit the ground. He feels that. That's a loss to the Creator. Now, if that's the case, if you're a theistic evolutionist, you just basically say God could care less about. That was God's plan for that sparrow to hit the ground, and billions of other sparrows like it. That was God's way of creating life and everything we see. I got a problem with that. So does God save original pets? Yes, I think he does, because he understands what getting the original is compared to one that looks like it. You with me? He can make us look like us with clones. So he doesn't do that. So I think God is, so I have fun with the following question: which animals will he save? Probably the first in Adam and Eve's story in the garden. I think all the originals are probably saved. How about the ones on the ark? I'll bet those are saved. How about the donkey that Jesus rode into, the ravens that fed? You can think about all this stuff. And I can imagine God, who totally understands the sympathetic part of values, in other words, the emotional part of the originals, having them over against, we wouldn't want kids that look like kids. I mean, you might get a Zoran that would be more cooperative with his mother, but his mother would know the difference, right? I think she would. Anyway, so God gets that. God gets that. So I think God will save our pets. I really do, because he understands how precious they were to us. Do I have Bible scriptures exactly to present that? But boy, I can sure show you a lot of things where God values animals. He loves his creation. Okay, moving on. So finishing up. I'm going to close with this picture. There's a T-Rex, and I'm going to put a scary head on him. Make him scary. And remind you of the original verse we started off with about a dragon. So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who does what? Okay, now Revelation 12 is just before Revelation 13, which is just leading up to Revelation 14. Good. These are all chapters working into the very last days when the devil is deceiving the world. What's he trying to deceive the world into thinking, among other things? He's trying to get them to disbelieve God created this world. That's why the first angel's message said, worship God who created. And God didn't create the world. You are all walking pond scum. You are all mutations. You are accidents. Fortunate accidents with no future, no hope. That's the method he uses. Now, incidentally, where does, I'm going to separate, put another word in there, because the word means the same thing. Dragon, big reptile, dinosaur, awesome lizard, pretty close. So does he not use the image of a dinosaur to deceive the world on the subject of origins, does he not basically put this picture up and people see it and they say, dinosaur, millions of years, not Genesis. I kind of think he does use that image. All right, now, what does this lady say about dinosaurs that has gotten us kind of into some questions? She says this, but if there was one sin above another which called for the destruction of the race by the flood, the worst sin, what is it? It was the base crime of amalgamation of man and beast, which defaced the image of God and caused confusion everywhere. Now, the word amalgamation means mixing. If you were talking about metals, you'd be talking about making alloys. If you're talking about biological amalgamation, you're talking about breeding or mixing that way. Now, first of all, she says it's the word, if there's a sin above any other that caused the flood, it was this. And so I'm thinking, well, then it's going to be in the Bible. So I go to Genesis 6, and it says this. The sons of God looked upon the daughters of men that they were fair and married whomever they wanted. Look at the next verse right after that. God says, I'm done. 120 years. That's it. It was a triggering thing for God. Okay, so daughters of men, sons of God, daughters of men, what's that? And please don't say angels. Sons of God, they're not angels. Sons of God were the sons of? They were the believers. These were the sons of Seth. These were the believing line. The daughters of men was the daughters of Cain, the unbelieving line. And so what happened is the last faithful people in God's family married out of the faith, and God had literally nobody left to connect with. It was it. It was done. Now that was what caused the defacing of the image of God. But what is the other thing? And incidentally, some people try to think this is saying man with beast. The Ellen White estate has made it clear that is not what this is talking about. This is talking about man with man, what I just told you, the Genesis 6, and beast, mixing beast with beast that cause confusion. If you think I'm kidding, take a look at the next verse.
I got a question.
Yeah.
You're talking about the sons of God coming into the women, but the scripture says that they chose women. And you're saying that the women they chose were the sons of Cain, the daughters of Cain?
Yes.
You're saying?
Yes. In other words, they were the ones that caused them to marry out of the faith.
But they chose the women, so they had a choice, didn't they, of who they chose?
Yes.
Do men choose women?
No, they just think they do.
They just think they do. Yes, they were attracted to what? Their beauty. Their beauty, and let's face it, probably before the flood, we all look better than we do now. So anyway, and yes, they were enticed by looks. But take a look at this about confusion among the animals. Every species of animal which God had created were preserved in the ark. The confused species, which God did not create, which were the result of amalgamation, what happened to them? It's destroyed in the flood. Now, here's where I'm going out on a limb a little bit. This is my view, but it makes sense with the biblical and what she just said there, and also the fossils. What was the thought of men only evil continually? What was the thing that especially was at the top of their list of things to be involved in? Violence. Remember, the world was filled with violence. All flesh had corrupted their way, and violence had filled the world, not just the animal kingdom, but the human kingdom. So let's imagine for a minute that the pre-flood people knew what they were doing. They were not cavemen. They were pretty developed, pretty smart. If I am into violence and I'm looking at a whole class of animals that are very impressive, I might say, what kind of pit bull can I make these into? What kind of warrior animal can I develop? What kind of animal can I use for hunting? What kind of animal can we use for sport in an arena? What kind of thing can we make? And I'm thinking the confused species were man-made, because remember, that was, man is involved in this. The devil inspired man-making confused species, and I think, again, if violence was at the top of the list, he wanted to make violent animals. And I think some of the things, like those images of ankylosaurs and so forth, here's the thing. The very best things God has ever made, what does the devil like to do with them? Destroy them, mess with them. Marriage, Sabbath. How about the most incredible line of animals that he'd ever made? Maybe the devil likes to create something out of that too. Now, okay, but here's another thought. There were a class of very large animals which perished at the flood. God knew that the strength of man would, what? Decrease, and these mammoth, that just means giant, animals could not be controlled by feeble man. So there was a class of animals that died in the flood, not because they were amalgamated, but because they were too big. All right? And they would be destroyed in the flood. And I think, frankly, the class of animals, remember, some of the dinosaurs were the size of chickens, and the average size of a dinosaur was the size of a large dog in terms of pure numbers of skeletons. But the big guys, God said, after the flood, actually they couldn't find food probably for a while, but these big animals, God decided to let perish in the flood without any being on the ark. Now, so what do I believe about dinosaurs based on all this? I believe God created a wonderful line of dinosaurs, the behemoth, that were an amazing class of animals. I think man messed with some of them and made some of them into warriors, and that's where some of the Adventist views that maybe impact this whole subject. Very hard for us to talk to non-Adventists about what I just said. Very hard to talk about amalgamation. But anyway, and I think, frankly, I've interviewed scientists, Adventist creation scientists about this and said, what do you think? Will there be dinosaurs in the new world? There's a consistent yes. And incidentally, I ask your kids and your grandkids that subject, you want dinosaurs in the next world? Yes! And I ask their parents, the parents go, and I say, parents, give it up. Who's God going to listen to? So anyway, that's my view on dinosaurs. Last comment. I have been warned that henceforth we shall have a what? Constant contest. Science, so-called, and religion will be placed in opposition to each other because what? Finite men do not comprehend the power and greatness of God. I consistently see throughout the whole science world people trying to explain things that I just say, oh, please give it up. You have no concept of what you're talking about. It is a much bigger subject than we can take in with this little gray matter we've got. We just got to wait till God can tell us more with a bigger capacity that we can understand. Right now, anything that you speculate beyond that is probably human pride working. Human pride. All right. Yes, question.
Genesis 6:4 says, and there were giants in the land before.
Nephilim. The word is Hebrew Nephilim, and people always ask about that question. Why is it giants? Why do we translate it giants? Just real quickly. The word Nephilim comes from a Hebrew word that means to fall. Now, we don't know if it's a objective word. In other words, in those days, there were fellers. That sounds funny. Fellers. In other words, causing somebody else to fall. And that could mean violence, that could mean intrigue or causing them to sin, whatever. Or it could be the fallen ones. Now, I told you about the Septuagint last night. Septuagint is tremendously important in the translation of the Bible and the history. The word Genesis, is that Hebrew or Greek? It's Greek. It's Greek. Exodus, Leviticus, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, these are all titles that came from the Septuagint. It influenced our Bible. Okay. When the Septuagint Jewish scholars living in Egypt before Christ were translating the Bible, they saw the word Nephilim. They looked at that and they said, what does this word mean? Incidentally, Jewish scholars today don't really know. But back then, they came up with the word gigantes, giants, in Greek. King James came along, looked at it and said, what does Nephilim mean? Anybody know what Nephilim? No, no one knows. What does Septuagint say? Giants, giants. So King James has giants. And that's kind of continued on. Now, we do believe they were bigger. But I'm just giving you the history of how we came up with the word giants. King James scholars were depending upon the Septuagint. And others do as well. Yes?
No, when the giants came, the men of renown, the giants came into them, wasn't there a change in the human DNA, and that's where the whole problem is today? The pollution that came from these giants spread throughout the whole land. Corruptions. Today we have the giant corporations that have that DNA in them.
Okay. Very interesting.
They're spreading this evil like they did back, just as in the days of Noah, so shall they be at the time of the coming of the Son of Man.
Spreading the DNA of this. Yeah, could be. I'd probably be a little bit more symbolic than the physical part of DNA. But anyway. How's our time? Is it done? We're done. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for coming again. If you want to come up here for a minute or two before the next person comes up and speaks. Anyway, thank you for the invitation to come. This is a lot of fun. It's been months. Can you tell? I'm rusty. It's been months since I've been able to get in front of groups like this. And so thank you, Dakota Camp Meeting people. When you hear the